The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand, and we gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise, to get what we want, we got to organize.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Pantsula Podcast, brought to you by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. For those of you not familiar with the A-APRP, we were founded by Kwame and Nkrumah in 1968. Our objective is Pan-Africanism, and we define Pan-Africanism as a total liberation of Africa under scientific socialism. Today, I have my fellow comrade Jamilah.
Our ancestors we're going to honor today. The first ancestor may not be known by a lot of people. She's a young African person whose life was taken away from her. Her name was Obianuju Osuegbu, and she was 17 years old when she was struck on her bicycle by an impaired driver. The police at the scene blamed her for her own death because she was not riding on the right side of the road. She was not wearing reflective clothing, and she did not have a blinking rear light. This is the reasoning as to blame her for her own death. It was clear that the police were not aware of Georgia's bicycle laws because lights are not required if a bicycle has reflectors, which she had. Also, she was turning left, which is not illegal to do. Family attorney Bruce Hagen stated, specifically right here, vehicles which approach from the rear, any other vehicle or vehicles stopped or slowed to make a lawful turn shall be deemed to be following the purposes of this code section. So Obianuju Osuegbu was not making any illegal turns, and she had a reflector, so she was not doing anything illegal. So she should not have been blamed for what happened to her. The driver, however, did have several drugs in her system, including methamphetamine and Valium. She was only charged with a DUI and endangering her children who were in the car when she was hit. So this is very passionate to me. Not only was a young African person taken away from this earth due to someone's negligence, but I was hit by a truck when I was on my bike and almost killed when I was on my bike. And my experience as a bike rider, I actually went to ask people whether or not there was some serious training in regards to paying attention to cyclists on the road. And every single person I have asked said, no, there's not any significant training on that. One person said to me, we're actually trained more on horses than cyclists. So it's very clear that the police who were dealing with this case also were not familiar with laws pertaining to cyclists. So I just want to say to folks, please pay attention to cyclists because your negligence can cost someone their life. So Obianuju Osuegbu Ashe. The other person we're honoring is Gabriel Prosser. He was a blacksmith who organized a revolt in Richmond, Virginia in 1800. He was one of the few enslaved Africans who knew how to read. He, along with Jack Bowler and George Smith, organized an initial plan to wield control from the Europeans. And they planned to establish a kingdom of Virginia. For months, they organized tactical military strategy. Plans to move forward were postponed as a result of a rainstorm, but totally thwarted due to some enslaved Africans whose interests were not in the people's liberation. As they snitched on Prosser's plans and whereabouts, Gabriel Prosser was captured and executed on October 7, 1800. Ashe, those are the ancestors, the folks who have met the ancestors either recently or a long time ago. And those are Africans whose names should be remembered. Ashe, thank you. And now we're going to talk about community defense.
Yeah.
Why is community defense important? we tend to, as colonized people, as oppressed people, talk about how we are being mistreated by the system, how we're being mistreated by police, how there is a school to prison pipeline, how there's food deserts, how the educational system, if you want to call it that, does not warrant success in one way or another. Books are old. There's asbestos in schools sometimes still. And so there's so many issues that affect poor, that affect colonized folks, that affect African folks, that affect indigenous folks. So one of the ways historically, and even in the present sense, in some cases, that have been dealt with to deal with these issues of oppression and inequities we face is community defense. So Winfred, why is community defense important?
It allows us to exist in a good environment, whether it's like having the ability to have food, to have a sense of security, to have a sense of community, to have a sense of just even basic health. Without community, just trying to go at it on your own, it makes it so much harder. So if we have like an organized effort and organized capacity in which we're trying to get all the things that we need to survive and at least like live a good life, then community defense and protection is vital to even living a basic life.
And I can name actual examples having participated in community defense in the A-APRP. For example, when I was in the Oregon chapter, or even before I was in the Oregon chapter, this is where I met Ahjamu. So there was a coalition of organizations and community activists who did house security for folks who were threatened with foreclosure. So we did 24/7 security for folks, and we just stayed with them the whole time and did provisions. And yeah, there was definitely some struggle with police on that end, with once in a while other folks who lived in that community. But if we are to live in a society which is humane, every single person has a right to housing, and every single person has a right to a nutritious diet. And so doing community defense is a means to do that. And there are various ways people historically have done community defense and how people continue to do it to this day. And so what we did in addition to that, we organized a freedom school. We organized a free breakfast program in the tradition of the Panthers. And there was a specific point program to get to the goal of the community being able to take care of itself. And this is one of the roles of community defense, where a community is able to care for itself without these outside oppressive forces. So if there is an issue with domestic violence, for instance, community takes care of itself on that. If it's just like, you know what, we need to have a program where the person who is the abuser is held accountable. And that can be done in a way that's not carceral. That can be done in a way which is, again, we might use the word humane a lot. So there are effective ways to do that. But community defense, by its very nature, assures that the community cares for itself to do that. And so that was one of our objectives in doing this through the A-APRP. These things are currently done. The Southwest chapter, they had a community garden. They do film programs. In Sacramento, there are self-defense programs / political education programs that are currently in action. So there are things that are totally continuing to be done in line with self-defense. And Ahjamu, that's his book. We keep talking about the book, but I'm actually showing the cover. Some things that he wrote in order to maintain, in order to begin a community defense program. I think these are very good tools. And these are tools that I've experienced with Ahjamu myself. So I know they are effective. And people, well, what if you did? You can't get rid of the police. We need the police. There's crime everywhere. Community defense works. I guarantee you it works. And people think in absolutes. So if you get rid of the police, there's going to be crime everywhere. Everything is transitory. Just as you had feudalism, moved into slavery, moved into capitalism, you're going to move into something better than that. Everything is transitory. So while it will be great, you just be like, no cop, that's not going to be happening. That's not the reality. Let's keep it real. So you have a transitory period to the point where, again, the community cares for itself, and you do not need these outside oppressive forces like the police to deal with issues of, quote, domestic violence or all of these other things. So how do we do that? We do it, as you mentioned, Winfred, in organized fashion. So what are some ways we can organize in order to create a community defense program?
I mean, at the basic level, like, this is something Asana Shakur mentioned. Like, at the basic level, knowing who your neighbors are, inviting them over for meals, figuring out, okay, who they are, what are the people that I live around, what are their needs, and then how can we work together to serve them. One example could be like one of your neighbors doesn't have food like as regularly. Let's say you have a surplus, you know other people who have certain ingredients for stuff, but don't necessarily have other ingredients that would be helpful for food. That way, like, everybody has food, everybody starts knowing each other, and then you're building a sense of friendliness and community. And then from that, looking at different systemic issues that might be happening in the community. I can think of at least a couple of examples from the Black Panther Party. The programs that they had was called SAFE. So it's Seniors Against Fearful Environments. So what they noticed, at least in Oakland, California at the time, that a lot of the crime that would happen would be happening to the most vulnerable. In this case, the elderly and people who couldn't really like fight for themselves. When crime did happen to them, they didn't really see police help them in any meaningful way. And so what the Black Panther Party did is they used volunteers from the community. So those volunteers would walk with seniors whenever they went out. That way they would have a sense of security, a sense of, okay, like, even though I'm old and I'm walking to the bank to get my pension, I still have somebody who will protect me in the case that something happens to me. And so a lot of it is figuring out what specific things people might need. Is not necessarily like you can just guess and assume what it is. A lot of it is talking to the people who are in the community, building relationships with them, and then over time, like, figuring out what are common patterns, what do people seem to need, and then how can we provide that. And it involves like every aspect of society. Kids or people who have like access to certain jobs or opportunities. The party also had a free breakfast program. They searched for funding and food from local merchants, from private donors. They operated a lot of it in a church. That way donations from like people could go to the church. They could get those things tax-free, which meant that they could afford more food, they can afford more materials in order to help people. People who have access to warehouses to store the food, people who have access to trucking to actually transport the food from wherever they got the food from. And it could be anybody, anyone and anybody who's in the community who like might have something that people in general can benefit from. Like all working together, all collaborating in order to provide different services that people need in the community.
One of the most important things in building organization is, as you said, building relationships, talking to people in the community and figuring out what it is they want. Because again, it is a community who is going to have to take care of itself. So you can't just come in here and assume you know what people want, because you might say, well, oh, they don't have a store over here. But what the community is saying is we just need heat. You have to figure that out. And you have to talk to them. And they might need both things. Who knows? But it is a community who has to inform you of what it is they want and what they need. And you build relationships based on that. And then you can contribute to laying the groundwork. But if you just continue doing that and they don't, they told you what they need, but you're doing something again, which is the total opposite, because they're not informing you of how you can contribute. And so, yeah, building those relationships is of utmost importance, because that is the basis of organizing, is building relationships, because you can't be an organization by yourself as an individual. Like, individuals do not change society, it's the masses of the people who do. In order to build those relationships, and those relationships grow, and then they tell other people, and then those people tell other people, and then you have a whole group of people into a community organizing for what it is they want and what it is they need. And that is the foundation of change.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so there are examples of that. You name the Panthers. There's definitely, armed wings. There's the armed wing of the American Indian movement. There's the armed wing of the NAACP. And I'm sure many of you listening have heard of Mabel Williams and Robert Williams. There's also the Deacons.
Who are they? For the people that don't know.
For the people in the back over there, Mabel Williams and Robert Williams. So here is actually a book about Robert Williams, Radio Free Dixie. There's another book, Negroes with Guns. There's a few writings on Robert and Mabel Williams, and I suggest you read them. Quite good writings. There's the Deacons of Defense, who, some folks may have heard of the Deacons of Defense as well. That when people talk about community defense and this whole idea of guns, and we don't need guns, and guns are violent, but you don't think about, again, the nuance. When people talk about guns, they think, oh, you're right-wing Republicans and Second Amendment. That's usually what I hear when people are talking about guns. And they're not talking about the experiences of colonized folks who were dealing with the hands of racists. They were dealing with the KKK. They were dealing with the police, in which members of the KKK were in the police. This is what they're dealing with. To assume that everyone's relationships to guns are one and the same is historically inaccurate. So you did have armed wings of these various organizations to protect themselves against these racist forces in the South and beyond. The Deacons for Defense and Justice, they were founded in November 1964, and this was in Louisiana. And so you think about Katrina, you think about Mississippi, you think about all of that. And so the chapter, actually the first chapter, was founded on February 21st, 1965. And this was the day Malcolm X was assassinated. So you want to talk about some gun violence. Yeah, it's like there's a difference between actual violence and self-defense. There were a total of 20 chapters in Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama. And so the role of the Deacons of Defense was to protect the families, to protect those who were organizing in civil rights organizations. So there were massive struggles with the KKK. To say that, guns are horrible, people utilize them for various purposes. So we cannot make blanket rationalizations. And even if you want to talk, everyone talks about how Martin Luther King was, nonviolent and peace-loving and content of character. And he also opted to get a concealed weapons license because his family was being threatened. So to not even, include Martin Luther King in this narrative in terms of what self-defense means. People think that when people say, I am not my ancestors, or all Rosa Parks did, which is get on the bus, they were organizing against these racist state forces. So you cannot equate guns to be the same thing from these racist organizations, these racist individuals, as what colonized and poor, et cetera, folks were doing. The Deacons of Defense was founded by Frederick Douglass Kilpatrick and Ernest Chilly Willie Thomas. There were also, you had CORE, where, there were a lot of critiques for CORE, but the intent was to have, education in terms of voting, organizing for voting registration. You had an armed wing of CORE because as people were going out to vote, it's just like, we don't want to get shot at.
Yeah.
So having a military tactical strategy is very important. If we look at what is written in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, it is, of course, of utmost importance that political education is key, because you can't have a ton of armed people without political education. So that's the first thing. It's just like wielding guns with no political education. That is a case for death. But so you had the Panthers, you had the Deacons of Defense, you had all of these armed organizations with colonized people. Political education was key on some level. Whether or not it's revolutionary, that's another conversation. But political education is key. Voting registration was key for these organizations. However, there were armed defense forces in these organizations because there was a lot at stake. People were being harmed, people were being shot at, people were being attacked left, right, and in the center from the state. So to, again, equate what these right-wing militia people were doing to what the Panther was doing, or the Deacons of Defense, or the armed wing of the NAACP, apples and oranges, not the same thing at all. And you had people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who was armed. And there was a component, people who identified as Christians or believed in a higher power. They saw nothing wrong with arming themselves. It's just like, look, so
you don't want to die.
Yeah, I don't want to die. If I'm gonna die, it's gonna be because God takes me. It's not gonna be because one of you takes me. So,
in the words of Jimi Hendrix, I'm gonna die when it's time for me to die.
There it is. There it is. And it's not gonna be by your hands. It's gonna be by God's hands. Exactly. So to look at violence and self-defense as being one and the same is definitely not. Self-defense could be anything from, if you're using your body, if you're using martial arts, to guns. But all of it is an aspect of community defense. People do focus on the gun aspect, but I just wanted to mention there were armed wings of organizations to protect themselves from these real forces, either the hands of the state or other side organizations that the state did support on some level. Again, there's KKK all up in the police. There's Nazis all up in the police. There's in the military, in the US government, in governments around the world protected by the US, these forces are there. So this idea that people who are being oppressed by the state should just lie down and take it no, that's a very liberal point of view to take, to look at like violence is one and the same, to be like, well, if somebody's hitting me, I'm just gonna let it. If you were in that situation, I guarantee you wouldn't be safe. So yeah, we cannot look at all of this as one and the same. That makes no sense. That has no historical context to it, and it has no material context to it, and no type of analysis if you're gonna equate everything as being one and the same. And also, if we want to really go into community defense, there's the Revolutionary Abolitionist movement, or RAM, and it's a network of self-defense groups. A lot of these networks, of course, are anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and so there's what they say is we call for the formation of groups across the country as part of a network called the Revolutionary Abolitionist Front. So of course, they're getting resistance from more right-wing or conservative factions saying they're evil. But if you look at this and then you look at what happened on January 6th, you can't equate the same thing. When you look at what happened where the people had the torches and you cannot look at that in the same way. There are people who are insistent on protecting themselves from those very forces. So to look at an organization having a network of self-defense groups against those forces, whether it's armed with guns, whether it's armed with other types of self-defense. We already know there is a political education component to this, because you can't call yourself anti-imperialist and not have that. That would make no sense. But it says, we are a militant defense organization committed to protecting people, revolutionary projects, and community spaces targeted by racist attacks. We are committed anti-fascist, anti-capitalist, and anti-imperialist who are part of the internationalist revolutionary movement. We organize in the tradition of the Black Panther Party's patrols against the fascist police and Robert F. Williams' armed Black Guard facing off the KKK. Today, we are fighting the same enemy. For example, in 2015, the Charleston AME Church massacre occurred, in which a white supremacist murdered 9 Black people. They say Black, we say African. In 2018, we witnessed the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre. 11 Jewish people were slaughtered that day. In 2019, in El Paso, Texas, there was the Walmart massacre. 23 predominantly Latinx people were gunned down by a fascist. These were not isolated incidents. From these outrages, we can see that we are in the earliest stages of a dirty war. The executive branch of the government has been seized by the far right and emboldened these segments of the population in its quest for racial purity and unfettered capitalism. The country is clearly pushing the entire world toward imminent collapse. The siege of the Capitol is the latest salvo in our conflict. So it is very clear they are looking at particular situations and material realities. The solution is to create an organization in which there will be a network of groups that are fighting head on those types of forces, either by the state, within or without. So to say that people organizing against these forces of fascism, of racism, of white supremacy, of patriarchy, et cetera, is, people are calling it unhinged or no, community defense is of utmost importance. And this is what they're looking at. They're looking at it on a collective structure. So it's not one community per se, but it is a series of communities because these attacks are happening in several communities. Political education is the foundation of building a community defense program. But then you have other aspects, which again, are military strategy, that could include, again, guns, that could include self-defense, et cetera. But it's of utmost importance we understand who and what the enemy is. And this is what's happening in these networks. So the revolutionary abolitionist movement is not that far off from what Robert Williams and Robert Williams' comrades did, Mabel Williams. It's not far off from any of that. The Deacons of Defense. So would someone call those people unhinged because they were protecting themselves against the KKK? Yeah. So we have to ask ourselves, what exactly are we supporting when we make, I'm saying we, but when we make absolutist statements, what is and what is not defense? Because there are lives out here that are being affected. And if someone is complaining about how people defend themselves, what are you doing to contribute to assuring that communities are not being attacked? You cannot make the decision about how another community decides how to protect themselves. We can say, hey, here's things we've done that are effective. But if you're not doing anything, you're simply complaining that, they're using violence, you can't meet violence with violence. What exactly are you doing? Are you joining an organization that is for the liberation of the people?
And then even beyond the point of using violence or military force, there's also a lot of things that people can do for prevention to make sure that these things aren't even problems communities can be facing. So let's say people are low income and don't have access to a lot of resources. In a lot of those places, there will be a hunger and a need for people to basically take whatever they can. So then it can lead people to commit crime. Because it's if I don't have any resources, and then like I'm hungry, and then I just see resources a lot of the time just being wasted. A lot of people would take that as a sign to like either steal or commit crime, or at least regardless of whether or not something is or isn't crime. And so communities can be a source where these needs and these problems can be resolved before somebody even gets to the point of thinking, okay, like I need to commit crime to get enough food to survive. Examples that we mentioned already are with the A-APRP and with the Panther Party, like the free food program and then community garden program. On top of that, the Black Panther Party also had a free shoe program, free clothing program, legal aid and education, cooperative housing program, free employment program. They actually had a job information network and like where they listed and shared information about job training programs, provided like early development education. They did free plumbing and maintenance, pest control, temple. They had a bunch of different services, which made it possible for people to, even when people didn't have a lot of money to afford things on their own and go privately to get the things that they needed, by working in the community, by like volunteering in one thing and then having other people volunteer to help you, and help make the cost of living go down. Because a lot of the things that you might have to, if you were to just go at it individually, just pay for like a different service or pay for a different program or pay for like a specific kindergarten, instead of trying to do it all individually, you could have other people helping you as you're helping them. Even if you don't have enough monetary cash that you can work with, a lot of the things that you need to survive can be handled with. And so a lot of the issues that you might have to face can be prevented. Another aspect of it can be through health. If you have a disease or if you have a sickness or a disability, even though it might not be a form of like explicit one person harming another person violence that causes the disability, it's still something that impacts people's lives. And it's still something that is a form of violence within the society at large. So having medical research clinics or just having like a space where people can discuss what kind of diseases, what kind of problems are people going through, and then people can share like what information they know, what information they have available, so that people are able to deal with problems more easily, and people are able to understand a bit more of like what things they're facing can be vital. They did a lot of sickle cell anemia research. They're actually one of the organizations that helped turn this into a topic of like international and national concern. Because this was something that primarily affected African communities, but it was at the time it wasn't really talked about at the level of intensity that the party thought it needed to be. And so this was something that they did in order to spread information about sickle cell anemia and then actually help with research to help put down the effects of it and the harmful effects of it. On top of that, they also had a free ambulance service. So they would have free and rapid transportation for sick or injured people for free, which meant that it became harder for people to go into medical debt because one of the costs of going to the hospital, so like even the ambulance, was available and provided for free to the people.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because when folks in the disabled community were organizing to get legislation, the Panthers was one of the organizations that went and provided food and coats. And there's also looking at humanity in and of itself. So it's like, oh, there are other communities which are facing the same forces of oppression from this system. And obviously there are folks in the disabled community who are African. So they had folks in the LGBTQ plus community who were assisting with folks in the disabled community. You have people in the Panthers, you have the Gray Panthers. So that is what community defense looks like. If your focus for us in the A-APRP, our focus is the primacy of Africa, but we also understand that other communities have struggles because we are all oppressed by the same system of capitalism. So disabled folks, one of which I am one, but if you're not getting enough in terms of SSI to even live, for instance, because you're not getting enough in SSI, you have to make a decision between food, rent, and the light bill or whatever. And then you're like, okay, we're going to be out here fighting to get some kind of legislation. Organizations like the Panthers, like, how can we help? How can we help? Because we understand the system oppresses all of us. So that is what community defense looks like. It can look different to many people. For instance, the breakfast program or the dental program of the Panthers or film series that they had. Where the Panthers were strong, you didn't see the police and you didn't see people dealing drugs in those communities in the same way, because like, we're protecting our communities. There's children here, like there's families here who do not want that in the community. And so we're here to make sure that doesn't happen. But to make the connection between the various communities, that is what real community defense looks like. Whether it's on the steps of the Capitol, and I'm not talking about January 6th, I'm talking about the folks throughout the years, and specifically notably 1990, were climbing the steps just to be recognized by a government that's just like, oh, y'all are disabled, or whatever, whatever. Oh, we thought we signed that bill. If we're looking at capitalism, folks who are expendable under capitalism are people whose labor cannot be exploited as much. So it's a particular age group that's favored. It's a particular gender, for instance, that's favored, and a particular physical capacity that's favored. So disabled folks, oh, we can't, like, your labor can't be exploited in the ways that we want. So, you're not really as important. And Africans, like, we can use y'all for prison to work there. So, there's different facets of that, of exploitation. And so the connections that the Panthers saw, the connection that other organizations saw, that is what community defense is. And so we cannot take that for granted. We can't look at community defense as just being this one aspect. Oh, it's people protecting themselves from these races or whatever. Because again, there's food inequities, there's educational inequities, there's financial inequities. So we have to look at all of that in terms of capacities we have organizationally. What can we do for community defense? So that can be simply one step. An initial step is creating a breakfast program. Initial step is, okay, do we have further capacity to provide medically for the community? Do we have another capacity to actually do security? So you notice that sometimes you go to concerts or events, what do you see? The Fruit of Islam there. So, you might go to, as you're saying, like, go to other organizations for that sort of thing, because, we don't have the capacity to have our own security, but we do know folks in the community who do. So you might see FOI. Like, you go to an event, you see FOI all up in there. So like, building with other organizations, reach capacities that we may not have as a particular organization. Again, the building blocks of organization is building relationships. So while you may not have a similar ideology as a particular organization, you can still build with them, because this is about reaching the masses and having that struggle in order to get there. That's fine. But we're here because we understand that there's something at stake and there is a common enemy. Even if we have different ideologies, we understand there's a common enemy. So the FOI there at our event, and then we might have another one providing food, because they have a farmer's market. As you're saying, like, we go to different markets and be like, hey, we're having free breakfast program. Can you provide food? So all of these things can happen. It is a reality. It is happen in some capacities to be like, well, that doesn't work. So, okay, like you make no sense right now because it actually has. It is effective. Community defense is effective and it is very powerful. And one thing I've learned about doing community defense is when people who never had experience in it but come to get involved, like you start seeing how much they blossom as a person. Because like, oh, wow, I never thought that I could do something like this. And then you want to go out and make the world a better place. So you're like, I'm just here in my community. I don't know. We don't have much power. But yeah, when you see, you're like, here's a platform, do something and create a community that you want to see. And just people who felt they never had the opportunity to do that. And you help them with the resources to get there, you really do see people blossom. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And the children just glow because it's like, well, I never had anybody talk to me in the way y'all are talking to me like I'm an actual person, because you go to these schools and you're just a number. You need to pass a test in order to get any sort of grants or whatever. It's just like, and it doesn't account for children learning in various ways. Some people learn through words, some people learn through music, some people learn visually, but everyone's just learning in the same way. And so you're going to see those patterns where some kids are not doing as well as others. Treating a young person in a way where it's like, okay, I'm going to talk to you about what your needs are, and just having that space where you do it. That's another aspect of community defense. So we have to have these things instead of being like, well, I don't have time to spend time with my kid. Let the schools do it. No.
So gonna mess up the kid.
Right. And so the whole concept of the village raising the child, and that's another aspect of community defense. Like if the material reality is any caregiver, parent, guardian you have, they all might have to go to their jobs. And so you might be by yourself for a time, but if you have another person in the community, be like, hey, let's chat. How was your day? Just something simple. And the community caring for itself and each other is just, those are aspects of community defense that's people don't discuss that, because it does come down to people just this absolute violence and you can't, it comes down to that. But as you're saying, the programs the Panthers did, feeding people, having free breakfast programs, or the notion of the food bank, all of these things, the farmers markets, the after school programs. So they go to these capitalist institutions, but then they have somewhere to go where they can use their creative side, especially since music programs were taken out of schools. Now they have somewhere they can go to further hone their creative brain. And so you see so much good come out of that. We can see that with, what came out of Head Start, the beginnings of it anyway. And again, you can have all kinds of critiques about how the capitalist system has stolen that, but just even how it started, just a way for young people to get a particular side of themselves out in their creative brain, and making sure they're seen as people, I think is a thing that should be discussed more when it comes to community defense, because you're building young people into hopefully revolutionaries that will do the work that the ancestors did, and then continue that. And then when they get older, they'll, have the generation after them. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So look at community defense against these oppressive forces as being just as violent. No. You should try it sometime. If you're just being like, I don't know, try it sometime. It's good for you.
I think in community defense, a lot of it relies on being able to treat people, as human beings, as people worthy of like love, of like listening, of respect, and then working together to help each other. I think we can go to last words.
Join an organization. And with that, you can create a community defense program. And that goes with everything we're saying is establishing a political education program straight up into self-defense. It is a whole wave, a whole experience. It's a whole world that so many people are missing out on. And so we go, well, if we take this thing away, we're just going to be in trouble. So try it out, experience it. And if you feel the same way, then that's another story. I guarantee you, you will not feel the same way. If you actually join an organization for the liberation of the people and do some community defense work, I guarantee you, you will not say, well, what if we have this? I do not. No. And I guarantee you, just doing this organizational work has definitely made me more optimistic because I know there's going to be a better world out there. I already know because I see it happening. We even see how in Mexico, the government, there was a Senate vote, there was a vote to nationalize the lithium. So we see it happening. What do I keep saying? There is this wave we see around the world where socialism is a reality. And if it's not a total reality, we see the beginnings of that reality that is happening around the world right now. Unionizations are happening in places that were never expected to happen because there's so much struggle. So we see the end of capitalism happening. It may not be the total obliteration of it in our lifetime, but we're seeing it being chipped away. And I think once you join an organization that is a revolutionary organization, or one that really focuses on the harmfulness of capitalism and working to stop that harmfulness in one way or another, you see those waves. If you're not organizing, just like, I don't know, it's happening too slow. I don't know, like, it doesn't make sense to organize because it's not going to happen in my lifetime. So why should I care about it? Join your organization and your view on that will change. I guarantee you. Guarantee it. Join an organization.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. And to close out, one book that I'd recommend that I learned a lot about the Black Panther Party's programs. It's called the Black Panther Party Service to the People programs. So it was edited by David Hilliard, one of the main members of the Black Panther Party. Yeah. Do you have any other books that you recommend?
Yeah, there's another book called Body and Soul, which discusses the Black Panther programs too. So there are plenty, but that's another book. If you are looking for other podcasts, etc., to listen to or watch, if there's live stream visuals, we have our ancestors' voices. We have the Revolutionary African Women. We have the Forward Ever podcast, and we have the weekly Pan-African News. There are many networks. We've been talking about networks. There's so many things. And I know that there's a lot of coordination between Black Alliance for Peace and A-APRP. There's Black Power Media. There's We Charge Colonialism. There's a lot in terms of media we can look at for this political education, for offering solutions, because we're organizing for a better world. So we just implore you to do the same, not just be a listener. We implore you to be active in this struggle against the forces that oppress all of us, because it's the only way we're going to counter the oppression is by being active to work against the forces. So forward ever, backwards never.
Forward ever.